What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button, and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's
When
get to
the
it.
third generation RX debuted in late 2008, its design was considered controversial, but, as is usually the case, quickly got used to it. There were no special sufferings and about disappearance of permanent all-wheel drive. The audience of this crossover was quite enough. Ordinary electromagnetic clutch, connecting the rear axle, and for those who did not move off the asphalt, there was even a front wheel drive version in the range. RX got to Russia in 2009 and with the change of generation practically did not rise in price at the start for the car with a 3.5-liter engine asked 2.63 million rubles. Cars, by the way, really came to us from Japan, which for some buyers was an important advantage. A little later we got a hybrid, which was a little more expensive, from 2.7 to 3.1 million rubles, and even later there was a version for the frugal with front-wheel drive and a 2.7-liter engine for 1.85-2.2 million. Restyling of 2012 affected mainly the exterior. Changes in technology were minimal. For example, there was a sport mode, and even in the list of configurations appeared version F Sport. Prices rose slightly. RX could be bought from 2 to 3.3 million rubles. The popularity of the model remained stable, annually being sold in circulation of several thousand units. So the secondary market on it is formed. At the time of writing the material in the sale on Avito was more than 500 cars, and restyling and pre-restyling were almost equally. Let's find out whether it is difficult to find a good variant and whether there are no frankly bad ones. It is difficult to find a bad copy from the point of view of body preservation, and it is almost guaranteed to be a car poorly restored after an accident. The age of 6 to 12 years is not critical for Lexus RX, so serious age defects will not be found. However, on the earliest cars it is already worth paying attention to the cavities of the arches, the condition of the front lower part of the sills and the rear part of the bottom. Here it is quite likely to meet corrosion, although the main surface of the bottom is covered with plastic. Otherwise, the defects are typical: rusting chips on the arches not covered with plastic, rubbing at the joints of bumpers with wings, defects on the hood and windshield frame, and fading chrome. Of course, corrosion under the molding of the fifth door and in the license plate niche is also not avoided, and sometimes rust appears just on the area of the door itself and under the Lexus nameplate. Body repair in the case of the Lexus RX is not the biggest problem. The popularity, which promises the availability of cars on dismantling, and the range of non-original for the most demanded positions are in favor. For example, the windshield is offered in assortment from 7 to 30,000, so even a variant with heating of a resting zone of wipers can be bought for 15,000, while the original costs about 60. The front bumper also has replacement options, albeit piece by piece, but cheap, at 9 to 10,000 instead of 25,000. But the rear bumper will have to be bought original for the same 25,000. Non-original hood can be found for 10,000 at the cost of the firm in 65, which can also be considered an excellent savings. And front fenders are available for 5 to 7,000 instead of 25,000. By the way, it is convenient that wings and hood with restyling have not changed. It makes it easier to find parts at the scrap yards. And what you will have to pay for is for headlights. There are rare analogs. A xenon headlight can be found for 18 to 20,000, but the quality of manufacture does not suit everyone. And the original is 65 to 80,000 depending on the performance. In general, here you will have to dig around on dismantling. Good European are also ready to come to the rescue. With the change of generation, RX has not changed a platform, remaining on the same carriage under the name K, on which Camry is based, Highlander, Venza, Lexus ES and many other models. Suspensions, of course, were redesigned, but in general their schemes are familiar: McPherson up front and multi-lever at the rear. One of the main changes was the refusal of air suspension in some markets. For example, in the US it was, but in Europe and Russia officially delivered only cars without air suspension. Actually, in the absence of air in the suspension, there are no particularly expensive solutions that can empty your pocket or disappoint you after purchase. The front McPherson is simple and repairable. The ball bearing is bolted on and is changed separately, and a non-original part can be bought from 500 rubles to 3,000. The front hub bearing is also changed separately and is inexpensive. The front L-shaped lever can be bought 2 to 5,000 rubles against 10 to 12 for the original, but the ball bearing in any case will have to be purchased separately. Of course, separately you can buy in silent blocks at a price from 500 rubles. Stabilizer struts also cost from 500 rubles, and both front and rear. Amortizers will cost 6 to 8,000 for firm and from 2 to 3,000 for substitutes, and a decent variant like KYB will cost 5 to 7. Rear levers, which there are only 3 on each side, are expensive, 15 to 20,000. Except that the upper transverse costs 8 to 10 and non-original 2 to 4, the rest even in a rare non-original version will cost 5 to 8,000 per piece. A typical solution would be to repress the silent blocks. Large ones like the front rear longitudinal arm silent block cost 1.5 4,000 and small ones cost 1 to 2,000 each. True, the rear hub bearing, unlike the front one, is changed as an assembly with the hub unit and costs more. But what could be really expensive is air suspension repair. There are no non-original parts here, and the front air struts cost 50 to 60,000 per piece, and the rear cylinders cost 35,000. And the price tag of the compressor is 6 figures. In general, if you get a piece imported copy of RX on pneumatics, you should soberly estimate your financial woe breaks of the crossover. With weight more than 2 tons got modest, here are used discs with diameter of 328 mm in front and 309 mm in rear. A small consolation is that rear discs here are also ventilated, and front brakes are 2-piston, but the brakes power is still enough for the car without reserve. But expendables are inexpensive. The front brake disc can be bought from 2,000 instead of 6,000 for the original, and the rear one from 1,000. Pads are also available from 1,500. In general, if lines are intact and parking brake is correct, there should be no problems here. Steering control of the third generation RX has received electric amplifier instead of hydraulic. Earlier EPS was only in hybrid. And its work should be paid attention to. There should be no jerks and snags. Separately it is not changed, and the steering column in an assembly with the amplifier has a 6-figure price tag, so it is better to check the work of the amplifier so as not to get into expensive repair. But the mechanical rack is cheap. The restored unit can be bought for 10 to 20,000 rubles. All-wheel drive in RX of the third generation, as we remember, is absolutely typical. Instead of the interaxle differential, there is an angular gearbox and electromagnetic clutch that connects the rear axle when the front axle slips. Accordingly, at purchase it is worth to check the work of the clutch and condition of oil in it and gearbox, and also to inquire about the periodicity of replacement. However, the probability of critical wear is not so great. RX is seldom bought by those who storms off-road, so the main question is whether oil in knots was changed. RX always has one gearbox. It is a 6-speed automatic U660EF, which in the hybrid is supplemented with a planetary gearbox for the electric motor. The gearbox is not immortal by Toyota's standards, but it is quite good. It had some childish diseases on mechanics, but they should already show themselves in the first 5 years of operation, so the chances of getting into their repair are not so great. In general, the resource of the box can exceed 250,000 kilometers, especially in quiet drivers, which are enough among owners of RX. Conditions for this are simple: to change oil once in 60,000 kilometers together with filter, and not to abuse sharp starts, which actively wear out torque converter locking pads and contaminate oil, which already works at a temperature of 130 degrees. 3 motors were assigned to the crossover, although the Atkinson Cycle 2GR FXE, which is installed on the hybrid, is the closest relative of the usual 2GR FE, best known to us from the Camry. One of its main drawbacks on the RX is the same as in the Highlander and Venza, its 277 horsepower, which comes at the cost of a high transportation tax. It is curious that the hybrid at the same time laid in tax-friendly 249 forces. Otherwise 3.5-liter V6 can be considered quite successful. Chain drive of timing here is reliable, distributed injection is simple and inexpensive, and the only conditionally chronic disease is the failure of phase regulators, which, however, are not very expensive. 10 to 12,000 per piece. But on RX there are no problems with scoring of the first cylinder as on the Highlander or fifth cylinder scuffing, like the Highlander. Lexus GS inlet here is quite tight, and if the catalytic converter does not crumble and does not dust, there should be no problems. At purchase, however, still it is not necessary to be stingy on compression measurement and endoscopy to estimate condition of cylinders. And to be sure in absence of oil loss because of the lodged rings. The budget alternative to the powerful V6 is a 2.7-litre inline 4 with the Index 1AR FE, the related 2.5-litre 2AR FE. Is also familiar to us from Camry. This motor is also quite simple and good. Cast iron liners in aluminum block, chain timing and distributed injection promise normal resource. Well, and the power of 188 horsepower was an important argument for many buyers, so the cars with this motor on the secondary market are about as many as with V6. However, four-cylinder motor means not only rather sluggish dynamics, but also absence of all-wheel drive. RX 270 was exclusively front-wheel drive. So, if you do not see sense in purchase of a crossover without all-wheel drive, you will have to choose between transportation tax and potential investments in a hybrid car. Such on the secondary market are also found. Here the key attention should be paid to the condition of the battery. If in traffic jams the car now and then starts the gasoline engine, its residual capacity is critically low. It is very expensive and troublesome to change the complete battery, and repair with partial replacement of battery cells is not mastered everywhere. So to pay 40,000 tax per year, perhaps, is better than to pay 20,000, but with risk to pay 150 to 200 more, and even more. Thus, the optimal option in the case of the third generation RX is quite simple to choose if you need all-wheel drive and rich equipment. It will definitely be a 3.5-litre car without hybrid superstructure. Having 2.3 to 2.5 million rubles, you can look for a car aged 7 to 8 years and a mileage of about 100,000 kilometers. From the first owner, approximately, and if Autoteca will confirm accident-free history and low mileage, then with good maintenance. Lexus can go another 100 or even more thousand kilometers before the first serious investments. In conclusion, the Lexus RX III, priced at 2.3 million rubles, presents a compelling case for those seeking a blend of luxury, reliability, and performance. While the initial investment may seem steep, the long-term benefits, including exceptional build quality, advanced technology, and strong resale value, can make it a worthy choice. Ultimately, if you prioritize comfort and prestige in your driving experience, the Lexus RX III could be a valuable addition to your life. Consider your personal needs and budget, and weigh the pros and cons carefully before making your decision.